Begin recording. Okay, there we go. So today is the last part of the three-part series on Holy Jerusalem. We have so far, and you know, this was set up so that we're finishing just a few days before Tisha B'Av, which begins on Wednesday night. And my goal was to try and give everyone both an appreciation and an alternative way of looking at Jerusalem and why it is such a mystical place in Jewish thought. Why we have this notion that God's presence lives there in some different way than God's presence lives elsewhere in the world. That's very different than maybe other perspectives that you've had on Jerusalem before, sort of its importance in Jewish history, that's for sure. But this is something else that we've been looking at in the past couple of weeks, not its historical importance. We're not looking at the archaeology, who founded the place, why Jerusalem. We're looking at this notion that there is some holiness to the city and specifically to the Temple Mount that causes us to relate to it in a different way. So we started the class looking at sources from the Bible, which don't really seem to have much of a problem at all with the idea that in Jerusalem, there God's presence manifests in a very real way. And then we look at how the Talmud might be criticizing that in some of its stories, criticizing it, maybe almost making fun of it, certainly saying this can get out of control. The idea that God's presence is found somewhere is a dangerous notion. And I think that adds some really important complexity to the discussion, and that's what's introduced in the Talmud. Then we looked at Maimonides, who strangely keeps the temple's holiness intact, even the Temple Mount's holiness intact. That is, Maimonides says, even after the destruction of the temple, God's presence still exists there, and nobody can ascend that mount because the sanctification of that place was eternal. That was Maimonides' view, and he thus kept everybody away from that place, almost in a way focusing their attention on other things, because since the Temple Mount was inaccessible, well, you have to get close to God in other ways. Then last week, we really spent most of the class focusing on different, I would say, alternative ideas on Jerusalem's importance and holiness. Very strong sources on Jerusalem being a symbol, not an actual place, but a symbol. We saw in Hasidic thought the idea that we ought to make our lives like a temple, like Jerusalem, make our actions like Jerusalem. And then this strong idea of Jerusalem as the city of justice. And that's found early on in prophetic literature, maybe not explicitly, but certainly the rabbis see a strong connection between Jerusalem and the idea of justice. And I think that's most felt when you think about the presence of the Sanhedrin, right? The great court that used to sit in Jerusalem. It's like the supreme court of the Jewish people. Well, since it's there at the temple, then Jerusalem itself becomes a symbol of justice. And really, when we think of the holiness of the city, we're not thinking about God's presence there. We're thinking about an idea that lives in a certain place. And I think the one who really took that idea and created some modern vision with it was the last source we looked at last week. That's Chaim Hershenson, right? Chaim Hershenson, who believed that in a new state, he didn't live to see the state, but who believed that when there would be a Jewish state, Jerusalem ought to be the city of justice for the world, and that it has to be an antidote to the nationalism that certainly during his life was taking over in so many countries. That is, his feeling was justice that lives underneath the flag of a certain country is always going to be polluted. And that Jerusalem ought to be an international city that doesn't live under the flag of any nation. It's this idea that really could use some further exploration. Judaism and religion in general as a, let's say, balancing factor to nationalism. We think of Judaism as a very nationalistic religion, right? It's based on this idea of Jewish nationhood, which is why it's so crazy that this very Orthodox rabbi would propose that in the holiest city to this nation, we not have any nationhood. It's crazy. But he said that's true. That's what Jerusalem was always meant to be. The place where the Ten Commandments serve as an inspiration to all of civilization, not just for the Jewish people. So today we're going to look at one source that I added to the packet that came to mind because someone last class asked me about Muslims and how they understand Jerusalem, how they came to the Temple Mount, right? Because their mosque, or the Golden Dome, right, that was built by one of the caliphs, I think it was Umar, built the Golden Dome, and supposedly at the very site where the Holy of Holies stood. So someone asked, how did that come about? And I tried my best to answer the question, and then remembered this fascinating source that I really want to present to you, because it relates to this topic of how Jews ought to look at the Temple Mount. So I'm now going to share my screen so that we can look at this source with you, and I'll need some help reading it. And can you all see it? Can you give me a thumbs up if you can? Thumbs up if you can see the source. This is from Professor Yeshayahu Leibovitz. Some of you may have studied Professor Leibovitz before. Fascinating Jewish intellectual, fervently Orthodox Jew with very unorthodox ideas about where Judaism comes from. And this is from his book on the weekly Parsha. He wrote a book, just commentaries on the weekly Parsha, but he includes in this book a source that's very old, that sort of comes out of nowhere, that's not really studied in Jewish academies. It's not part of Jewish literature. It's a book called Pitron HaTorah that he says was found by a scholar in Israel, which contains very old rabbinic stories from the medieval period. And he introduces this story in his Parsha where he's commenting on Jacob's blessings to his children. If you remember, at the end of the Torah, Jacob has a different blessing for each one of his children. And Benjamin's blessing, why is Benjamin important? Because remember, Jerusalem, the city, is in Benjamin's territory. The land of Israel is divided into the different sons of Jacob, right? Each tribe gets their own territory, but Benjamin gets Jerusalem. So obviously, there's going to be some greater importance to the blessing that Jacob gives to his son Benjamin. And just to remind you of the blessing that Jacob gives, if you can read here the Hebrew, Levinyamin Amar, do you see that? To Benjamin, Jacob said, Yedid Hashem Yishkon Lavetach. You who are the, Yedid is friend, right? You are the friend of God. And Yishkon Lavetach, you will dwell securely, safely. Alav Chafef Alav Kol Hayom Uvein Ktefav Shachen. Safety will dwell on you all day. Kol Hayom, all day. Uvein Ktefav Shachen. And between your shoulders, there's that word Shachen again. Remember, we've seen that word from Mishkan, the dwelling. Between your shoulders, there will be a Shachen, a dwelling. They're talking about, you know, this is written technically before the temple was established in Jerusalem, right? Because this is from the Torah. So this sort of hints in the Torah that one day you, Benjamin, between your shoulders, you could imagine the shoulders being the mountains of Judea. Between the shoulders, God will dwell. So on this verse, Professor Leibovitz has a lot to say. And I thought whoever it was, I forget, last week who asked the question about how the Muslims got to the temple, I think you'll find this very, very interesting. Okay, who do I want to pick on? Helen, I haven't picked on you yet in this class. Are you okay to read for us?
Sure.
Okay, so here we are. He dwells securely between his shoulders, he dwells. And now let's look at what Professor Leibovitz says on this verse.
Traditional commentary, part plain interpretation, part legendary drush, applies these words to the temple service on the Temple Mount, which lies in the inheritance of the tribe of Benjamin. And if the temple...
Okay, so that, as I said, traditionally we say that Jacob is telling Benjamin, when Jacob says, God will dwell on your shoulders, that's a reference to the temple. But then he has keep going, Helen, sorry for interrupting.
And if the temple is the residence of God's glory, then he dwells between its shoulders. But this raises the question. He surrounds him all day.
So that's part of the verse, right? The verse is, Chafef alav kol hayom. You are there, kol hayom. What does kol hayom mean? Kol hayom means all day, always. So the question Leibovitz is going to ask is, does that mean that even now, after the temple is destroyed, does God's presence still dwell there? If the blessing of Jacob is God will dwell there kol hayom, it doesn't say only while the temple is around and then God's not going to be there anymore. So the question is, does kol hayom mean God still dwells at the Temple Mount? What does he say?
All day, what day? The reference is not to a 24-hour period, a revolution of the earth around its axis. A day of the Holy One, blessed be he, is eternity.
Right. All day for Leibovitz means I will dwell there, God will dwell there eternally. This means?
This means that the dwelling place of God is eternal, but we see that was not eternal. The temple was destroyed and the site profaned, and upon it stands an alien sanctuary.
Upon it stands an alien sanctuary, right? He's referring to the golden domed mosque. How can we say that God will be there all day, in other words, forever? And not only is there no temple there, there's actually an alien mosque. So look at this source that he introduces. It's going to blow your mind.
There is an eye-opening midrash found in the book Pitron HaTorah, which won acclaim a few years ago when published by one of our generation scholars, R. Ephraim Merbach. This midrash from the Gaonic period contains much material from other more familiar midrashim, and also from midrashim which may be original or may have been taken from sources unknown.
So this rabbi, Ephraim Merbach, found midrashim, which are rabbinic interpretations and stories that date from the Gaonic period. The Gaonic period is usually 8th, 9th century, right? And Merbach publishes these midrashim in this book called Pitron HaTorah.
In this midrash, we read something new about, he surrounds him, I've lost my place.
Right here.
He surrounds him all day, and between his shoulders he dwells. Moses' prophetic blessing was actually realized for the sanctuary which stands there today. The sanctuary of an alien nation is not a site of idolatry. This sanctuary is a temple of a people which recognizes the oneness of God and means to serve God, even if it did not receive the Torah and does not serve God by observance of the commandments.
Thank you. So let's just pause there for a second. So first of all, I realize as I'm reading this, I made a mistake in the way I introduced this verse. I'm confusing the end of Genesis with the end of Deuteronomy. The end of Genesis is Jacob's blessings to his children. The end of Deuteronomy is Moses's blessing to each one of the tribes. So let me clarify that for you. And so when the verse says this is Moses's blessing to the tribe of Benjamin, now it makes more sense. I apologize for that. But look at, leaving that aside, look at what is said here in this midrash. This is incredible. There's a midrash that says that the mosque is actually holy for Jews, sort of, because that spot is the site, yes, of a mosque that is of a foreign people, but it's still a people that recognizes the oneness of God and the means to serve him. So the mosque is the fulfillment of Moses's prophecy. God will dwell there always, right? Well, Muslims believe in God, in the same God we believe in, and their mosque is a tribute to the holiness of that place and fulfills, in a way, the same goal that the construction of the Jewish temple would fulfill. We just need to understand Moses's prophecy in a different way. It's not saying the Jews will have a temple there always. It's saying that will always be a holy place. That will always be a place of divine worship. And it could be that means that we support, in a way, that mosque remains there because it is a mosque that is still built by a people that recognizes God's oneness. Now, you would never find this in a midrash nowadays. Just keep in mind, this is written by the Geonim. The Geonim are those who are witnessing what's happening in the world, sort of Christianity at one time laying claim to Jerusalem, which I think tends to be in rabbinic thought associated more with idolatry, right? In rabbinic thought, Christianity is often just a replacement for Roman idolatry. And now come the Muslims, and they've done something wonderful. They've re-established on that holy site a place of worship of God. It's fascinating to me. I mean, heresy in some circles, but you could only say this if it actually was real, if we actually found that source, right? I think I stopped you early, Helen.
We find then that this is still a temple for those who worship God in truth. These words were said during the Gaonic period, an era of Arabic rule over the land of Israel, and they certainly preceded the Crusades, during which rule over the Temple Mount passed into the hands of those who do not share our understanding of faith in the oneness.
Right. So for Leibovitz, these words, it's important to note that they were written before the period of the Crusades, when actually they may have even been more powerful, right? Because we would be rooting, in a sense, for one side over the other, one side representing the oneness of God, and the other not representing the oneness of God. Anyway, I thought you would find this source to be really interesting. I'm not saying it's right or wrong or making any political statement about it. We're going to get to the politics now. But before we get there, wanted to at least show you, and you should print this out because you won't find it published in too many places. It is obviously rather controversial, but I think plainly and clearly gives some Jewish significance to a non-Jewish place of worship. And you know that in many other sources, Jews are much closer to approving what goes on in mosques than they are approving what goes on in churches.
Yeah.
Right? The absence of any images of God, which is as important for Muslims as it is for Jews, makes a natural kinship when it comes to feeling comfortable in a place of worship. So this place of worship, which is still sitting on Benjamin's shoulders, might be, at least according to this source, still the fulfillment of Moses's prophecy. Crazy. Okay, so I want to show you something interesting before we get to the modern politics. This is a sign, a poster that was distributed in 1925 in Israel. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can see the source? I'm going to make it a little bit bigger so you can see what Rav Kook said in 1925 about ascending the Temple Mount. Azhara la Rabbim. I mean, you can see here the English translation. A public warning. Me'et Rabbeinu Hagadol Geon Yisrael, from the great rabbi, the sage of Israel, Avraham Yitzchak HaKohen Kook, Sheyichle Yamim Tovim. This is a statement from the chief rabbi of Israel. Some of you might know the name Avraham Yitzchak HaKohen Kook. And what does he say in this poster? 1925. Acheinu hayekarim habaim le'ir kodshenu Yerushalayim. To all our dear brothers who have come to the city of Jerusalem. Mikarov umerachok, those who come from close. In other words, I'm speaking to those who live here and those who are here to visit. Hishamru na, be warned or be careful. Meha isur hachamur. Now in huge, huge letters. Be careful of the strict prohibition. Ha'isur hachamur. And it's underlined. Shel haknisa lemakom hamikdash v'har habayit. The great prohibition of entering the makom hamikdash. What's he talking about there? Makom hamikdash. It's the Temple Mount, the Har Habayit, the place where the temple stood, and the Temple Mount. He says just at the bottom, Hashem Yivonenehu, he's praising that site, but he doesn't explain why. He just says, I'm just warning you, don't go up to that spot. Now that's very interesting. 1925, if I was going to ask you, where do you think he got this from? Why did he prohibit Jews from going up there? First of all, it would seem that people wanted to go up there. Why would he issue this poster if people didn't want to ascend? You see the big letters in 1925. This is maybe when it was easier to be able to walk up to the Temple Mount. I'm not talking about the Western Wall. Don't get me wrong. I'm talking about the other way, the Temple Mount, where the mosques are. Jews wanted to go up there, and he forbids it. And if I had to ask you, now my students who have taken this class, who know about this topic, why do you think he forbade people from going up to that site? Well, I'm guessing that you would say he holds like the Rambam. This is the view of Maimonides that we looked at together, that there is still some sanctity in that place. It is more than just a symbol. The Temple Mount is more than just a symbol. God's presence actually lives there in some way that we can't fully understand, but it creates a certain holiness that is inaccessible or should remain inaccessible to us, and therefore we're forbidden from ascending. Do not read this. He's not saying don't go up there because you might start a war or you might anger our Arab neighbors. You don't use the language isur chamur when you're dealing with community matters or when you're dealing with relationships with your neighbors. Isur chamur means it is religiously prohibited to enter that space. That's 1925. Now look what happened in the meantime. In 2014, a different poster that I'm now going to show you, and it'll give you a sense of how things have changed. And this is sort of preempting our discussion today. Can you give me a thumbs up, everyone, if you can see this poster? From 2014. Michtav Chizuk. A letter of, what's chazak? Chazak is strengthening. Now, I wanted to show you in the exact wording, so you see I'm not making this up. The Hebrew reads, the whole thing is in Hebrew, so I'll translate as best as I can. L'shecheno tidrishenu uvata shama. Well, look at this first word. This is our famous word that we've been looking at from the beginning of this class, the initials Shin, Chaf, Nun. Remember from Moses's prophecy about Benjamin? Uvein ktefav shachen. God will dwell. Li shachno. Lishcheno, to his dwelling place. Tidrishenu. Tidrishenu means we should pursue. Uvata shama, and go there. These are words that are picked out of a verse. They're, in my mind, out of context. But they picked these words from a verse in Deuteronomy. Let us go up to the dwelling place of God. And look what these rabbis say. These are religious Zionist rabbis, a whole group of them. You can see on the bottom, by the way, all of these rabbis. And I haven't had a chance to look at all of them. The one that I saw that was interesting is, do you see this name here? Nachum Eliezer Rabinovich. He passed away just about a month ago, Rabbi Rabinovich. He was the head of the Ma'ale Adumim Yeshiva, one of the big, he was a rabbi in Montreal at one time, Nachum Rabinovich, and he was one of the big signatures on this page. He was a brilliant man, but rather extreme in his views on Israel. And let's see the letter that he signs here. Achat hadrachim hachashuvot lidrishat hamikdash beyamenu. One of the important ways that we can show God that we are ready for the next temple, lidrishat hamikdash, to get the next temple, beyamenu, in our days, hi ha'aliyah lahar beit Hashem. It is to go up and ascend the mountain of God. Look at the reversal from 1925, I think it was, to 2014. The chief rabbi, Rav Kook, says, Isur Chamor. It is a serious prohibition to go up on that mountain. And now, the religious Zionist rabbis 2014 have changed their view. Now, one of the important ways that we can show God that we're ready is to go up there to the mountain. Baruch Hashem, thank God, Rabim ha'olim kayom lahar behakpada ala chalacha al pi horat haposkim haroim bekach mitzvah. Thank God, today there are many people who are strict about Jewish law and strict about following the interpreters of Jewish law, that see that our obligation to ascend Har Habayit, the Temple Mount, is a mitzvah. Whoa! Okay, at first he said, this is a nice thing to do. Now it's a mitzvah. It doesn't say it is a mitzvah. It says many people think it's a mitzvah. We've gone from 1925, it's forbidden, to 2014, it's a mitzvah. Gam anu hachatumim mata, also we whose signatures are beneath. Zachinu lehimanot miatomchim v'haolim lahar betahara. We also count ourselves as privileged to support the ascension of the temple betahara. Betahara means in purity. Now, what does that mean, in purity? You know, I asked a friend of mine what this meant. He said it probably means go to the mikveh beforehand. But the truth is, betahara means you have to be pure also from any other impurities, which require, if you remember from last class, it requires a red heifer. And that's probably one of the reasons why Maimonides said you can't go there, is because we have no red heifer. You can't purify yourself. So maybe these rabbis feel like B'tahara, you can get to some level of purity from going to the mikveh, and if you go to the mikveh, that's enough of a state of purity to be able to ascend onto the Temple Mount. Anyway, there's more here. If you remember the murder of Rabbi Yehuda Glick, or the attempted murder of Rabbi Yehuda Glick back in 2014, what they're saying is the best way we can respond to this attempted murder is to go up to the Temple Mount and claim it reclaim it, I should say, as a Jewish space, and etc., etc. God should accept our prayers. And all of these rabbis signing underneath. There's Rav Chaim Druckmann, who is also a very, very important figure today. Anyway, if anyone would like a copy of this, they'd like to see the names, just ask me for a copy of it. What happened? In less than 100 years, we've gone from the Temple Mount being prohibited to the Temple Mount being maybe a place that we are obligated to ascend in our day and age. Well, obviously, the huge thing that happened between 1925 and 2014 is the State of Israel. And the creation of a state changed, I think, the meaning and the symbolism of the Temple Mount for Jews all over the world. You can see it too in the sources that I gave to you. I'm going to share them with you now on the last page. In 1991, if you read here what Menachem Froman said, Menachem Froman was in the 90s considered the ideological head of the religious Zionist movement. Could someone read for me? Fran, would you be able to read for me what Rabbi Menachem Froman said in 1991 about the Temple Mount? Fran, you have to unmute.
Okay.
Thanks. Yep.
Okay. The national religious public concept consists of two very forceful elements: a very realistic materializing one, the actual settlement of the entire Eretz Yisrael, and a messianic spiritual one, objection to entering the Temple Mount.
Now look at this. He defines in 1991, Froman, one of the pillars of national religious ideology is objection to entering the Temple Mount. Now why? Because he says in this sentence, we have realistic goals, that is, we want to settle the whole land. But we also have this messianic spiritual goal, right? And look here at how he defines that spiritual goal, Fran. Go ahead.
The messianic element is perceived from an Orthodox point of view, waiting silently for the Messiah, not creating a false Messiah by our own hands. The holiness of the Temple Mount is expressed not by barging into it, but rather by withdrawing from it.
Now this leading thinker is following, I think he's explaining another dimension of where Rav Kook was coming from. And this is something we haven't talked about really in this class. But the idea of a third temple and waiting for the Messiah is one of the major points of disagreement in Orthodox Judaism today. Thank you, Fran, for reading. Some of you might know that there are even some ultra-Orthodox rabbis and sects of Judaism who think that the state of Israel is phony because we did it ourselves, because we built it ourselves. We didn't wait for the Messiah to come and for God almost to instruct us in how to rebuild the Jewish homeland a third time, in a third period. Froman says, there's an element of that messianic redemption that is true. it just doesn't apply to the whole land. It just applies to one place. We can build the land of Israel. We can settle it. In fact, for him, that's the obligation. This is a guy who strongly believed in the settlements and in spreading out as wide and far as possible across the land. But what's fascinating is this man who believed that Jews should be everywhere in the land, at the same time believed they should not be in one place. And what is that one place? Happens to be the holiest place of all. We express our hope in a messianic redemption by withdrawing, by not being in anywhere near the Temple Mount. So maybe Rav Kook was following the view of the Rambam, of Maimonides, who said that there's still holiness there. But maybe Rav Kook, who was also, if you know about Rav Kook, had Hasidic and sort of mystical tendencies, a lot of them. Maybe this is the true reason why he forbade people to ascend the mountain. It wasn't really because he believed God's presence was holy there, but because there needed to be something that we had to wait for. Waiting. Ani ma'amin b'viyat HaMashiach ve'af al pi sheyitmameha. Even though the Messiah may tarry, im kol ze ani ma'amin. Jews have to wait for something. We have to wait for redemption. And yes, that can be symbolic, but it's also physical. There's a physical place that we must wait for, and that is the Temple Mount. For him, that is not just some side philosophy, some added consideration in the ideology of religious Zionism. For him, it is core to what it means to be a religious Zionist. Build everywhere, withdraw from one place. That is what religious Zionism is. Isn't that interesting? Now, this is also a challenge to what I claimed just a few minutes ago about what changed between 1925 and 2014, those two rabbinic proclamations. Because what I claimed to you is maybe the state of Israel is what changed. And now that we have a state, we should be going up to the Temple Mount. We can claim it as our own. But this statement from Rabbi Froman is 1991. There's already been a state for many decades now. And still, the voices of the religious Zionist community are rather tempered on this subject. I would say not even tempered. They don't really want to talk about it because it's a pillar of their belief that we don't go up to that spot. So I think there's something more. Something else changes. It's not just the establishment of the state of Israel. And I really want everybody, if you want to do some mental exercise during this class, the question of this class is what changes? How do we get from a place that is supposed to be off limits to a place where we have rabbis calling for their adherents to ascend as a mitzvah, and these three statements here that I just included as examples, so you can see how even the politicians have gotten involved in this debate. Stan, can you help us here?
Okay.
This is Tzipi Hotovely. You've heard of Tzipi Hotovely. She's in Netanyahu's party.
Okay. The construction of the temple in its place on Temple Mount should symbolize the renewal of the sovereignty of the people of Israel in its land.
So now you're getting a bit of a sense of, this isn't just the establishment of the state. I hear in her words, this is just me, you can all attack me later, I have no problem with that, but I hear in her words some anxiety about Israel's survival, its existence, its sovereignty. What is she talking about in 2012? The sovereignty of the people of Israel in its land? Who's questioning the sovereignty of the Jewish people? It's crazy. That's a point that we affirm all day, every day. We have Liot Am Chovshi B'Artzeinu Eretz Zion Yerushalayim. This is our land. She's only saying this, I think, because what does change in the past couple of decades, this is what I offer to you, is that the anxiety levels of the Jews are increasing. Our demographic challenges, our ideological challenges, Israel's future survival. We're in a very scary time, even in 2012, thinking about what the future of Israel might be. And maybe, for Tzipi Hotoveli, one of the ways that we can reaffirm, after the failure of so many peace agreements, reaffirm our right, our claim to this land, is to abandon this whole idea of withdrawal. And let's plow forward. This is not a time where we should be withdrawing from anything. Withdrawing is exactly what the Arabs want us to do. We don't want to withdraw. We want to go, we want to claim, not just claim the land, but she says, let's build the temple, because it is a symbol of the renewal of the sovereignty of the people of Israel in its land. Keep going, Stan. Let's see what Gila Gamliel says.
Okay, Gila, she says, the temple is the people of Israel's ID card. We are the Beit HaMikdash.
We are the Beit HaMikdash, right?
Right. It's the nation of Israel's direct contact with the divine. It's our right over this land.
So this, again, I think I hear at least, the anxiety of why is there a mosque on what is a mosque doing on our holiest site? That site is our ID card. Now, by the way, some of you might know that the symbol of Jerusalem for Muslims is what? It's the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It is and the Golden Dome. If you walk through the streets, if you see protests against Israel, always you'll see an Israeli flag burning, fine. But always you will see the symbol of the mosque. Why that mosque? Because many Muslims believe that by showing you a picture of that mosque, that's giving you a visual image of a rightful claim to that place. And Gila Gamliel, who's a journalist in Israel, she says, no, they're using our symbol. They're using our ID card. It's a false claim. They're taking a picture of a building, but the land underneath that building is what should be on our ID cards. That's the image we should be projecting to the world of Israel's claim of its right to that land. It is the place where we believe we can make contact with God. And that's why I included that quote, because I think that choice of words of it's our ID card is not accidental, because basically Al-Aqsa serves as the ID card for Muslim claims over the land. So why don't we have the land underneath it serve as our ID card to sort of affirm our claim? And again, I don't think you would be hearing these statements if there wasn't a building anxiety over Israel's future? How can it be that a sovereign country has in its holiest place restricted access for its citizens? It's absurd, right? And in our day, you're hearing many more voices saying, we got to get it back. It's time to rebuild. It's time to claim it as our own. And it's our right. And Moshe Feiglin, some of you know Moshe Feiglin, the always interesting Israeli politician.
Okay. Moshe says it's not a religious thing. It's about sovereignty.
Now, I love this quote because of the way he starts it off. I want you to hear when he says it's not a religious thing, I want you to hear him say, and Feiglin is an observant Jew, I want you to hear him say, I don't really care what the Rambam says. I don't really care about what Rav Kook says. This is not about God's presence being on that mountain. I don't want to keep talking about the religious stuff. I want to ignore Rabbi Grover's first class and his second class. I don't want to talk about it. It's not interesting to me. This is about what are we today as a modern Jewish state, and this is a discussion about sovereignty. Stan, read these words really slowly. I want everybody to think carefully about them. Whether you agree or disagree, think carefully. There are many, many Israelis who agree with every word that Feiglin says.
It's about sovereignty. We are here on the Temple Mount on a national mission.
On a national mission. That's the goal. Not the statement I showed you from all those religious Orthodox rabbis who say it's a religious mission, right? It's a mitzvah. We've got to go up there because God wants us to, so we show God that we want to rebuild the temple. That's not what Feiglin's saying. It's a mitzvah for us because of national reasons, because of our sovereignty. We need to go up there because this is our land. Go ahead.
Every Jew that goes up the mountain, every single Jewish foot stubbornly ascending the Temple Mount reclaims Israel's sovereignty, not only on the mountain, but for our whole land.
So for Feiglin, the Temple Mount is the pillar upon which the Jewish claim to the entire land of Israel rests. Let me repeat that. For Feiglin, the Temple Mount is the pillar upon which the entire Jewish claim to the land of Israel rests. If we don't have the Temple Mount, our claims to everything else are kacha, are weak. Because if we don't have our holiest site, if we don't have our most important site, if we don't have the original site, what do we need Tel Aviv for? Tel Aviv is not, we have no historical connection to Tel Aviv. And so for him, as long as we say we have Tel Aviv, but we don't have Jerusalem, you've said nothing. Because Tel Aviv had people who lived there before us. But that site, as the home, it symbolizes the historical connection of the Jewish people and their right to the land. If we don't have it, almost nothing else can replace it. No amount of land, you could capture the rest of the world. It wouldn't be enough. This is our locus. This is what we need to be aiming towards. And he uses here, go ahead, Stan, the image of the menorah.
The menorah, symbol of the state of Israel, will return to illuminate our temple, God willing.
So I like this phrase because he brings the ancient symbol of the menorah and reminds us, how absurd is it that we have the symbol of the state of Israel is a menorah, but if we ever had that menorah, we couldn't use it. That's what he's getting at. We have the symbol of the state of Israel is the menorah. Well, if that's our symbol, we need to, if we ever get it back or rebuild it, we need to have a place to put it. And what good is that menorah? What usefulness is there to that symbol if we don't have the place where that symbol means anything? And so the rebuilding of the temple with the same menorah that is the symbol for the state of Israel in Moshe Feiglin's mind, that is the dream. That's the goal. So again, I am only submitting to you that what changes from 1925 to 2014 from those declarations, it's much more than just the state of Israel being established. I would argue that with increasing anxiety about the security and the long-term viability of the state, we're going to see, I would guess, increasing numbers of Israeli politicians pushing for access to and reclaiming that site as our own. Because you see here in the very quotes that they're using, the symbolism that is given to that site and how it has become in the modern state much more than just a religious symbol. It is, as Moshe Feiglin said, it's all about sovereignty. And I'm just, for your amusement, I would ask you to compare what Moshe Feiglin says to the source we learned last week from Malki Bakodesh, from Chaim Hershenson. Chaim Hershenson, who says in his quote that Jerusalem ought to be a city where no flag flies, a city where there is no nationalism, a place where we can think of justice and administer justice without the corruption of nationalism and statehood. What do you think he would say to Moshe Feiglin? I think he would say, you are polluting, you are destroying the very role that the prophets assigned to the city of Jerusalem. This was a place of tzedek, a place of righteousness, a place of justice, and you're using it as a way to lay claim to your national rights. And it will never, ever be able to be that city so long as you have turned it to a symbol for something else, particularly for a symbol that is exclusively Jewish, that really has nothing to say to the rest of the world. And Feiglin would probably tell Hershenson, you live in a dream. You never saw the state of Israel. You don't know what our modern problems are. Your idea of what Jerusalem should serve as is messianic nonsense. And even last week, I think one of you said to me, how did Jerusalem ever function like this? Well, that's exactly what Feiglin would say to Hershenson. You're dreaming. It could never be that. And so if it cannot serve as an international symbol, then let it at least serve its purpose in today's political discussions, in today's political climate. Let it serve as in the function of re-establishing Jewish sovereignty in its homeland, and obviously nothing could be more powerful than rebuilding the temple on that site. On a cynical note, I gave you one last source here to leave you with with a lot of cynicism. This is a great, great source from Avot de Rabbi Natan. I don't know if you are familiar with Avot de Rabbi Natan. It is, it's a commentary, or maybe a reinterpretation on Pirkei Avot. I think we're all more familiar with Pirkei Avot, the ethics of the fathers. This is sort of a reinterpretation of Pirkei Avot with a lot of interesting stuff. Also very early source. Doreen, would you be able to read?
If you are holding a sapling in your hand and someone tells you, "Come quickly, the Messiah is here," first finish planting the tree and then go to greet the Messiah.
So on this theme of the Messiah, I wanted to share this with you. If you're holding a sapling in your hand, someone says, "Come quickly, I see the Messiah." What is the advice of this sage? What does he say, Doreen? Right. Finish planting the tree. In other words, don't listen to crazy people who tell you the Messiah is here. Finish planting. It's a greater chance that your tree will yield you more benefit than going out and greeting the Messiah.
And if the youth say to you, "Let us go up and build the temple," do not listen to them.
If youths, okay, so listen, sorry for interrupting you, Doreen.
All right.
But listen to what he said. This is a real Jewish source. This isn't modern. This is ancient Midrash. If young people say to you, "Let us go up and build the temple," don't listen to them. And why do you think that's the advice? Well, it's sort of making fun of youth, isn't it? Like, young people are crazy and have crazy dreams of doing crazy things. And if they're telling you, the young people are saying, "Let's go do something really out of left field," don't listen to them. It's a trap. Go ahead, Doreen.
But if the elders say to you, "Come, let us destroy the temple," listen to them.
Now, this is really interesting. If the elders say to you, "Let's destroy the temple," obviously this is all, none of it is meant to be taken literally. This midrash was written long after the temple was destroyed. The elders say, "Come, let us destroy the temple." You should listen to them. Why? Go ahead, Doreen.
For the building of youth is destruction, and the destruction of old age is building.
The building of youth is destruction, and the destruction of old age is building. What does that mean? In the Hebrew, binyan yeladim stira, v'stirat zekenim binyan. The building of youth is destruction, and the destruction of old age is building. Doreen, what do you think this means?
The building of youth is destruction. Well, if you leave it to the youth, then they're not going to do the proper job.
Very good. If you, I think it's even more than that, but you've caught on to the, I think, the essential wisdom here. When young people, and I think you should read young people. I don't like ageism as much as anybody else, but when you read, when it says young people, when naive people, when people who are too hot on their own ideas, and they don't think things through carefully. When people who are immature, I think it's a better word, when people who are immature tell you to build something, what's going to end up happening is they're going to actually destroy. Their building will cause destruction. But when a mature person, when the elder says to you, "You know, we should get rid of this. We should destroy this," the building, the destruction of old age is building. sometimes a wise person will say, destroy, or I'll use a different word, withdraw, or stay away. When someone with wisdom and maturity says to you to withdraw, which seems to you like they're saying destroy, that might be their cue to build. And in other words, that might lead to more benefit than actually building something. Does everyone understand that I explained that in the right way? I think there's a lot of to think about here. It's a beautiful phrase, right? The building of youth is destruction. The destruction of old age is building. Sometimes the right thing to do is not to build. And you will find out that you will build more by not building than if you had perhaps done so without enough forethought. Proof of the matter is Rehoboam, son of Solomon. We don't have to get into it, but for those of you who want to read that story, you can read the second, I believe it's the second book of Samuel, or excuse me, the first book of Kings. I'll get back to you on that. And you can read about what happened to Rehoboam, who in his immaturity went ahead and built something which ended up being a disaster. So I share that last source with you to give you a healthy dose of cynicism as we end this class, because as I said, more and more voices in this age of increasing insecurity over the land of Israel, and I would really sort of define the past 10 years in Israeli politics as sort of years of tremendous growth for Israel as a country, with an underlying sense of insecurity that just doesn't seem to go away. And every couple of months, there's another article that just depresses people about Israel's future and challenges its long-term prospects. And we have to respond, and we have to keep fighting and keep claiming our legitimacy and keep responding to those who say we have no claim. Well, in an atmosphere like that, I think you're going to hear more and more people who are like the youth of that verse that of those verses from Avot Rabbi Natan that I shared with you, saying, hey, we got to go, we got to build, we got to lay claim, we got to get up there and rebuild the temple. Well, what do you think is going to happen if we do that? You know, there are consequences to such decisions. And unfortunately, fewer voices like Rav Kook, like Rav Froman, who we saw, who, it's amazing, who used our withdrawal. Can you imagine that? Just thinking about it. Who used the withdrawal from the Temple Mount as a symbol of religious Zionism in his day. That idea for him was key to what it meant to be a religious Zionist, because for him, we got to wait for the Messiah. There's an aspect of religious Zionism which still says there are greater things yet to come, and we need God for that. And Moshe Feiglin says, we don't need God. It's time to do it ourselves. We got to go up there and rebuild and lay claim to the site with our own hands, because if we don't, our very claim on the land in its entirety is always going to be in question. So this is the class that's probably going to provoke the most, the strongest feelings in all of you. And I apologize. And I tried to do it in a way that was balanced, but of course, you never succeed when you're trying to do that. So I do want to have some minutes for discussion. So before we do that, I'll stop the recording and just say that it was wonderful learning with you. And I hope that given the Tisha B'Av is coming up in just a few weeks, in just a few days, that our learning about Jerusalem and its historical status and where its religious significance comes from and what remains of that today helps us to understand why Tisha B'Av is such an important commemoration on our calendar. For those who think that it's just a day of commemorating a destruction, like a physical destruction of a building, well, you're missing the point. As you review the sources that we've looked at today, I hope you've seen that this is about more than a building. It's about a site, a place, and I would say something more. It's about the introduction into Jewish theology of fundamental questions that we still don't have the answers to. That's what Tisha B'Av is. Everything was nice and easy when we had a temple in Jerusalem and everything stood and we knew the daily sacrifices and everything could just go on as normal. But because of the temple's destruction, we have new questions that are still being fought over. What is our right to that site? Should we go up there? Should we not go up there? Should we rebuild another temple? Should we wait for the Messiah? And that those questions provoke division among the Jewish people. And if you ask me, that is more of the message of Tisha B'Av than the destruction of a physical building. It's the loss of Jewish unity that ensues from the temple's destruction. And the rabbis go even further and say the temple was even destroyed because of that disunity. And that's why, to me, Tisha B'Av has always had a very powerful message to Jews today, because as a community that is very, very diverse, I wish we could see past our differences and realize how much more we are united instead of constantly bickering over everything. And that makes us weaker as a people. So one day a year, we try and think about that and how we could do better, not as individuals, but as a people, to heal what has broken us in the past 2,000 years. So thank you, everyone. You're free to log off now. I'm going to stop the recording.